Hi, friends. This is Emily, and this is the Friendly City Books podcast. In this episode, I get to talk to friend and author Joanna Pearson about her new upcoming campus thriller novel, her debut, Bright and Tender Dark. And one reason why I really wanted to discuss this book with her is because it is set in Chapel Hill, where both she and I have been students. And it also does bring up a lot of things that may be triggers for individuals. There is sexual assault in the book. There is violence against women that unfortunately ends in a character's death. And as we talked about, various crimes that we have, seen in the headlines that were reminded me of things in the book. There was one that I failed to include like all the information about. And so I wanted to take a moment to share more about this particular incident. In 2015 in Chapel Hill, 3 Muslim American students were killed in an off-campus housing apartment. Is actually an apartment complex where I had friends from grad school who lived there. And it was right after I had relocated from Chapel Hill. The students who were killed, their names were Dia Shadi Barakat, Yusor Mohammed Abu Salha, and Razan Mohammed Abu Salha. Dia Shadi Barakat was a student at UNC's dentistry school. His wife, Yusor, was planning to enter UNC dentistry school in the fall, and her sister, Razan, was a student at North Carolina State University, majoring in architecture. And they were killed by a neighbor. He is now in prison for their deaths. And I didn't have their names readily available as we were talking about this particular incident. So I wanted to make sure that this was, on the record, because it was a awful event that really touched a lot of people who we know in the Chapel Hill community. This happened on February 10th, 2015. And since then, the Muslim community in the Triangle and at UNC has been involved in a lot of efforts to keep their memories alive. And in particular, I'd like to give a shout out to the Lighthouse Project. The Lighthouse Project started to help young Muslims in America feel a sense of belonging in their communities by giving back. So if you have any interest in learning more, check out the Lighthouse Project. And if you'd like to learn more about their lives, look up their names: Dia Barakat, Yusor Mohammed Abu Salha, and Razan Mohammed Abu Salha. Thank you. Hi, friends. This is Emily, the founder of Friendly City Books, and we are on the Friendly City podcast today with debut author Joanna Pearson. Hi, Joanna.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. So Joanna and I have been pen pals for a while now, and Joanna's been, writing and grinding it out and like making her way through, and like has had this huge breakthrough with this novel that's coming out this summer, Bright and Tender Dark. It's coming out from Bloomsbury. And it's been really cool to just like see your career grow over the past couple of years. And most recently, Joanna got the exciting news that she has been named to a new fellowship program with the South Arts nonprofit organization. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, they're really cool. I admire what they're doing so much. And Joanna is literally like representing the state of North Carolina in this program.
Woohoo, North Carolina. That's right. Well, and I was going to say, Emily, the way that I feel similarly watching Friendly City as just this amazing bookstore, but like what I think the best of local independent bookstores, like this place that fosters community and celebrates writers and brings people together and is just like this part of a vibrant literary culture. I feel like I've been watching y'all do that and rooting from North Carolina. So
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I know. So Joanna and I like first got in touch through her brother, who went
Hmm.
to grad school with me at UNC, which is also the setting of this book. So I obviously really enjoyed reading all the UNC references in this. But before this, Joanna had this short story collection that was published by an academic press that
Hmm.
did really well and kind of like teed her up for success. And one thing that I was like very excited about as, the novel started to go through the production pipeline is that one of the chapters was put in Best American Short Stories, which is another just like really amazing, notch in your belt, like thing to put in your resume.
Yeah.
So let's talk about like what the book is about. And then I just have like lots of questions for you. But would you give us like your pitch as the author? What do you want our audience to hear about your book?
Yeah, yeah. So thank you, Emily. I love your enthusiasm. It means the world to me. So essentially, it's the story of a murder. I think that probably is the simplest place to start. I think it does some things that are different from other literary mysteries, but it starts with the death in the early days of the year 2000 of Karlie Richards, who is this charismatic, vibrant, beloved undergraduate student at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Um, and so that's sort of the inciting incident or inciting piece of information in the past. Almost 20 years later, her former freshman year roommate, Joy, finds a letter. And the letter is one that was tucked away in an old school book. She hasn't seen it. And the letter basically calls into question what actually happened and who is in the person who is in prison for this murder. Did he really do it? What actually happened? And that's sort of that's the basic premise. And so we toggle back between 2019 and 1999. That's sort of like my initial pitch. I could say more, but maybe I'll wait and see what comes in the conversation naturally.
Yeah. But yeah, so for those of you who love like a juicy thriller, like this is going to scratch that itch. Um, it's set on you know, do we call 1999 historical fiction now?
Yeah,
Uh,
I know. Isn't that wild? I think it's like historical. Is it historical fiction if you lived through it and are too lazy to research actual historical fiction? I don't know. It kind of is though, right? Isn't that shocking?
I mean, it's pre-cell phones, right? Like,
Yes,
because I
yes.
was literally thinking, like, I know you get to like remove that element of like them
Yeah.
having cell phones, but like this 1999 era was like some people had pagers, but like
Yes.
it was kind of a status thing, or like some people had very early cell phones.
Yes. 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 It's funny, as you were prior to this conversation today, I was actually thinking about my area code, which the area code I have is from my hometown, where I've literally not lived since I was a fresh-faced 18-year-old. And I was thinking, when did I first get my cell phone that had that number? It was definitely part of a family plan with my parents in my young adulthood. And I couldn't remember. I was like, was it in my very, very last years of college? Was it when I graduated? I couldn't remember, Emily. Like, I don't remember when they became ubiquitous?
Yeah. Well, for me, I'm just like a few years younger than you. I remember,
Mhm.
so I when I turned 16 and got a driver's license and got a car, I was allowed to have
Yeah.
a cell phone then. And so it was like a safety thing. And that was
Yeah.
2002. And it was a Nokia. It, had Snake on it. In order to text people, you had to like press like the letter, like, or the number, like
Yeah.
multiple times to get to the
Yes.
letter.
Yes. Yes.
So we
Yes.
didn't text.
Well, this maybe this is about right because that probably was right around my senior year, 2001, 2002, senior year of college. And I'm thinking that is maybe when I got a cell phone because I definitely remember that number system. Anyway, we've dated ourselves.
I
Well,
know. Well, I should actually, to be fair, the book also opens, like in present day, where like where Joy is on like Reddit.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we do have some more or recent references to internet culture as well.
Yes, exactly. Well, that and it's funny that we're talking about culture and technology and like the sort of artifacts of our technological life. Because you're absolutely right that that was something that I played with throughout the construction of the novel, and I had a lot of fun with that, from Reddit threads to an old-fashioned letter, like the old-fashioned epistolary our epistolary past, and you know um, assignments that one turns in for their undergraduate classes. But yeah, I wanted to, for some reason, I wanted to be able to include these kind of artifacts that were both, of the 1999 era and also of the present. The other one that I had fun with, even though it's not really crucial to the plot, but remember how essential AOL Instant Messenger was?
Yes.
So essential to our lives,
Oh,
right?
and how much thought process we put into our away messages. Like, what
100%. Yep.
what emo lyric are you going to use? Mine were usually Death Cab for Cutie.
Yes. 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 You're exactly right. You had to use that away message and have some kind of gesture towards your impeccable and slightly obscure taste, just so
Yes.
people would know. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have to ask, do you remember, like, or are you willing to divulge what was your AIM screen name?
I think my AIM screen name was a very boring, like initials, birth date, like month and day. Very, very, in fact, I know that's what it was. I know that's what it was, but I will say, I love that we're getting into all the fun, non-essential Easter eggs. I definitely used for a character in this novel who is a complicated character. Some might question some of his actions. I don't want to call him a bad guy because, in a way, when I set out to write this, part of my enterprise was that I was not going to flatten anybody and make them a total baddie. Like that I think that there are very interesting and fun thrillers where the complexity is really in the twisty turny plot architecture, but at the end of the day, the person who was doing the mischief is just a baddie, a serial killer, or just out to do no good. And the interesting thing though is the how.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this, what I was much more interested in is kind of the why. And so the rule I made was that no one was going to be. I wanted everybody to be sort of fully human and all that complexity, and so no one was going to be sort of just out and out bad. People were going to make mistakes. People were going to self-justify. But anyway, long ramble to come back around to. I did use my favorite AOL screen name, belonged to my friend John, who I still adore to this day, although I don't get to see him very much because he lives in Berlin. And I told him, and I said, yeah, you're not a bad guy. He certainly wasn't a professor, but I was like, I'm going to totally lift and use Professor Plum 71 as the AOL screen name. And so shout out to John McCusker if he listens to this.
Yeah, I did pick up on that, but I'm glad that you use this as kind of like an entry point to talk about your characters because they are all very complex. And there is also, you can kind of see this like spectrum of like, I guess, morality and ethics. And you can see like where different characters lie on the spectrum. So Professor Plum 71, I guess, is how we'll reference him in this conversation. But he is on the morally gray side of the spectrum.
Yes.
There's definitely like a toxic masculinity side of the spectrum, but you do also, you present them as fully realized people. And why they do what they do based on animating factors from their childhood and previous traumas. And I think that makes them very interesting. Then you have this other side of the spectrum, and I'm going to call it Christian Girl Autumn.
Yes. Perfect. Yes.
And, so obviously, this is Karlie and Joy, especially like, as they are bright-eyed first years walking onto campus are like eventually they get pulled down the spectrum. But so actually I'd mentioned before we started recording the podcast that I had a mood board for the book, and that is Christian Girl Autumn is basically the theme of the mood board.
Chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. Perfect. That's exactly what I was going for and didn't know it until you have given it its proper name. Exactly.
So I have some songs that are part of the mood board. Um, so one of them is Jars of Clay,
100%. Yes.
which
Yes.
I found an old mix CD that I made from high school, which is from around the time of this
Uh-huh.
book. And their song, and of course now I can't think of the title of the song, but it's the one that's like based on Noah's Ark, and it's got like the really intense drums and everything. And I was like, you know what? This song still slaps.
They were a force. No, you're totally picking up what I'm laying down. And like that was so of that time. You're right. And I will say I was not a true Jars of Clay girly, but I was surrounded that was very much in the milieu. And so like that was going on and they were very popular. And then this whole strain, which I wrote about it almost because I find it, no offense to all the listeners who still love ska music, but like what I really disliked was Christian ska. And there was a real strain, at least for me, like in Western North Carolina, like that sort of like small town, the kind of like Shelby, Boone, Asheville, people were like gathering together and playing their Christian ska, and they were really cool, and they would jump around in their big pants, and it was just interesting to behold, and it was interesting for me to mentally revisit how like if you're in that Christian girl autumn world, like that was really cool. It was really something.
Yeah, totally. Because you would have like this boyfriend who played guitar and would like hang out with the youth minister. And
Mhm.
I remember like our local churches organizing like van trips to see like our away high school football games and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I know, yes. I, I lived this life.
Emily,
Um,
you know all this. Yes, yes, you do.
so another song that I have on my mood board playlist is Taylor Swift from Evermore, "No Body, No Crime," the song that she does with Haim.
I like him. Here's where I'm going to confess, and please, no one come after me. I'm not a Taylor Swift person, and it doesn't mean I dislike Taylor Swift. It just means I don't know her oeuvre. I am not like one of my daughters is a excuse me, like a strong Billie Eilish fan, and for some reason she has kind of decided that Billie Eilish is diametrically opposed to Taylor, which might
There's a
be.
little bit of a rivalry.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like I can sort of see that. And so I don't know it, but I believe it and it sounds right based on what you're saying.
Yeah,
Even the
go back.
title. I'll go
Yes,
back.
because it's kind of like if the Chicks, FKA the Dixie Chicks,
Yep.
had been able to do Goodbye Earl the way they
Yes.
wanted to, because the whole origin story is they wanted to write a song about domestic violence ending
Yeah.
in the woman being murdered by her husband, and the record label was like, too dark, make it funny, and they did. So I feel like again, this is probably from that era as well, that
I
song.
mean, I think you should make the playlist like the TM trademark playlist to this book. I think you should, Emily. Just like
Well, okay, so here's the next one, and I think you will that you'll be on board with this one
okay.
because it's in North Carolina.
Oh,
Sylvan Esso, Die
100%.
Young.
1,000,000,000,000,000%. Emily, I picked that, and this was probably before we even Instagram connected at that point. I picked it when I first got to share the cover. I was like, this is the theme song for the book. This is the vibe, North Carolina. This is it. This is like it sort of like conveys I think part of what the funny and interesting thing to me, which makes no sense but also makes complete sense, is that I think at least starting out in the book, Joy, who's in her middle age, who's reckoning with a divorce and sort of a disappointment, looking for a pivot, for meaning, for her next step. I think that in a strange way, she feels still to that day very jealous of Karlie. And it is a very strange thing to be jealous of someone who died tragically and is no longer even there. But I think in that way, that sort of die young way that that Karlie has sort of been deified and sort of raised up, and all the imperfections washed away from her mythic self, at least. So yes, that is the theme song of the book. Boom. Decided.
Well, I'm one thing that I loved about being at UNC was just like my proximity to Merge Records, which was a favorite. So yes, had to have Sylvanesso. And then speaking of kind of like how Karlie has been deified, because this blonde, white Christian girl, who is horribly, tragically murdered at a young age, reminds me of like Natalie Holloway.
Yeah.
In some of those kind of like really big, it was like this one individual and like people just couldn't let go. And I'm sure like the way that you have created this Reddit sub thread about, like these probably exist about like some of these like huge, like, I mean, cause like you couldn't like go grocery shopping without seeing her face on the National Enquirer at that time.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And I think that is in ways both interesting, problematic, complicated. I think I get it. I mean, I get like how can you not, when things like that happen, or I mean, this book is certainly not drawn from real life, except insofar that every piece of fiction is haunted by real life tragedies on some level. But there have been some notable and very sad actual murders at UNC and at other colleges. And I think those things kind of haunt the periphery. And I think it's very natural that we're all curious about that. And yet there's also something very strange about the commodification of those stories, and the sort of like there's at a certain point the interest starts to feel kind of prurient and uncomfortable. And I'm just really interested in that pull, which I feel also implicated in, but also sort of the distaste at the same time. That's Natalie Holloway is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. And now that we're talking about her, there's another like really horrible incident that happened at UNC when Alex and your brother and I were students there.
Mm-hmm.
And I now feel guilty that I don't know their names the way that I know some of these other figures' names. But they were two Muslim students who were murdered at an off-campus apartment.
Yeah, horrifying.
Yeah, in 2015. And it was right after I had actually left Chapel Hill already at that point and was just finishing the end of my degree. So I wasn't on campus, but I remember just how the entire student body was impacted by it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think of that.
Yeah, you're right. That was such a just like a shiver of like feeling awful in the community. And I think what was sort of beautiful, and I guess this is sort of the outcome one hopes, where I do feel like they what did they call them? R3 winners, R2 winners. There was like an organization that sprang up to sort of celebrate because they were very accomplished. Well, I think they were in the grad school. I don't remember their schooling, but like there were things that came up, like scholarship funds. And I think that I sort of not to say that anybody whose family member has been taken through tragedy has an obligation to go and found some good cause. I think like your obligation is to survive however you need to. But I do think that it is interesting and sort of beautiful how part of the meaning making of those losses can be that people come together and create these sort of things that really like shine the light on the goodness and try and promote other lifting up of people and community good. But that was a heartbreaking case.
Yeah. And, as I listen to your reaction about this, I can't help but wonder how much of your thought process and vocabulary is formed by your professional training as a psychiatrist. Or, wait,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, as a
Yeah.
psychiatrist. I want to make sure I use the right one.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
But I mean, how I actually would love to know whatever you can share about, like, what do you practice? Like, what are your professional interests in that world? And did any of that bleed over into your writing?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. I'm a general adult psychiatrist, and in my training back when I was in Baltimore at Hopkins, I was very much all over, inpatient units, consult service, the emergency room, the psychiatric part of the emergency room in Baltimore. So I had sort of that experiences. Nowadays, I'm in an outpatient setting. Um, so it's a little more calm on the day to day generally than like being in a more acute inpatient or emergency setting. But I think the thing that has happened to me well, I can't say. I mean, I was always interested in writing, so maybe this is, maybe it goes both ways so much that they both inform each other. But I think I I'm really profoundly interested in getting in people's heads, and I think that's part of what I was saying earlier about, for me, I'm not going to be a person, as much fun as those thrillers can be, where it's really a kind of like the twist and turns of the how the baddie did it. That's not going to be so much what I'm interested in. I'm much more interested in sort of like, well, how did somebody who they didn't set out to be a bad guy, they didn't set out to wreck somebody's life, they had a bad day, and they maybe really care for this person, and they were in a bad circumstance, and then how do they kind of like justify it? I mean, I think what I always want to do as both a writer and a psychiatrist is sort of be in the room with somebody, because what I find professionally is that people can sound irritating, entitled, whatever, if they just leave you a message or if you don't know much about them. It's very hard not to develop empathy if you spend any amount of time sitting across from them in a room hearing their story. Um, and so that's the same thing that I really try and do as a writer. And this book, which I don't probably isn't, if people out there, if they really just want like a Mary Higgins Clark style romp, it's probably not going to be their thing. But what I wanted to sort of offer is, yes, you will get the satisfaction of finding out what happens in the mystery, but I also really wanted to do almost like a postmortem of a community, like the ways in which so many people are touched by something, but then are also uh, preoccupied with their own lives and struggles. I don't know. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, actually, it makes me want to add another pop culture reference to the
Mm.
mood board.
Hmm.
Did you ever watch Broadchurch?
Yes. Yes. It's been a while, so I not,
Yeah.
but I liked it.
And it's giving me that same because I actually like I don't watch like Law and Order or
Yeah, me
like
neither.
CSI or like any of those shows. But Broadchurch was like more cerebral, but it was really like, okay, this horrible, tragic thing happened. And it was looking at the interior lives of all the people who were impacted by it or who were trying to solve it. Um,
Yeah.
and it just, it was complex and it showed, like all of the different things that they are dealing with in their lives aside from this big question that they're trying to answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great reference, and I had not thought of that as sort of like a television comp, but I think you're right. I think it's perfect, and I think that gets into a question that I don't think you've directly asked so far, but you might have been about to, about my own relationship with true crime. And I'm kind of with you. I think I'm not watching CSI, Law and Order, every single true crime podcast, but I sort of am selectively interested. Like, and I think it does tend to be more literary mysteries or shows like Broadchurch, where there really is this sense of like, well, how were all the people impacted? How was the community affected? Like what? Like it's sort of is about a crime, but it's also sort of interrogating the ways in which we go about approaching a crime. The other reference I'll pull in and offer it for the mood board is, I'm not a big true crime listener in general, but I loved season 1 of In the Dark, which
Oh, okay.
it's a fantastic, fantastic podcast. I recommend it to everybody. I mean, I think they're good in general, but season 1, it's strong medicine in terms of the story, but it's about the case of Jacob Wetterling, who was a child who was abducted in was it the 70s or the early 80s? I don't even remember. It's been a while since I listened, but what I loved about it was that same kind of complicated and broad view, where we're not going to just go in and sort of hit the detective beats, which I mean certainly are important, and if that's the thing you're doing, do that thing to its fullest. But it really was like looking at like, well, what happened? What were all the people? What about the teacher at the school who was falsely accused? What about that? I mean, it was just this very, very interesting and kind of like thoughtfully approached project.
Hmm.
So yeah, I recommend it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, not a true crime
Mm-mm,
drunkie.
mm-mm.
I guess you could also be a true crime drunkie, maybe. Um, but there is one thing that was just like another just Easter egg or pop culture thing that I just couldn't help but like find fascinating, was in the process of writing the book, and like as you learn more about the circumstances and everything, there's basically this DIY documentary crew that's
Yeah.
like, I mean, basically shooting like a YouTube series of
Yeah.
where they go like town to town, like, we heard about this murder here, like let's see if we can like get into the scene where it happened and like do some like really low rent reenactments of it with
Yes.
like
Yes.
randos that we find. But when it is interesting, like as you talk about internet culture today, how people can and do these things on their own now, in which like
Yeah.
maybe in the 80s the only way you could like get your true crime fix was like watching Unsolved Mysteries or Dateline or something, and if you actually tried to pursue a lead on your own, like people would probably think you were crazy. um
Yes.
but now, like, I mean, like anybody can go out there and be like, oh, I really like cereal. Like, I'm going to make my own cereal now. Cereal, the
Yeah.
podcast, not cereal, the food. But
I was with you. I was with you, but they could do both, but I knew what you meant.
and Joy really, the character of Joy really gets caught up in this. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I just thought like was so smart about your choices with the characters and the plot and everything is how Joy is this middle-aged mom. And she's going through a hard time. She's getting divorced and everything. But she's got young sons who are like high school age. And so many times in just like in daily life, really, you see like people's concern about teenage boys getting radicalized on the internet, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, the mom is the one who gets radicalized on the
Yeah.
internet, and
Yeah.
and one of her sons is like genuinely worried about her. And
Yeah.
he's still a child, like he's still, I mean,
Hmm.
he's a teenager, but he's, like 16, 17, something like that. So
Hmm.
I just thought it was so interesting how you flipped that parent child dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting that you raised that. That's such a smart readerly observation, because I don't even know that I was consciously thinking that's what I was setting out to do. But I think you are exactly right. And it does interest me. I mean, it very much interests me how the internet is this, I mean, really, it's amazing. It's this amazing treasure trove, resource, tool of connection, tool of information, but also, place of misinformation, place of radicalization, place of, I think, feeling rather than connected, further isolated. And I think about that across the lifespan. I think about like, it could be anybody, but I think of stories of older people getting swindled by romance scams, or getting
Mhm.
really into their armchair detective stuff, or even some of the culture of certain multi-level business opportunities. One of the people that, while we're throwing things onto the mood board, one of the people who I think in a nonfiction sense writes in a very interesting way about this type of topic, I think, is my friend Rachel Monroe, who also very kindly was one of my early blurbers and wrote a wonderful book that everybody should buy from Friendly City Books called Savage Appetites. It's a fantastic nonfiction book that is kind of, how do you call it, case studies, but it's sort of looking at people's relationship to true crime, but also sort of like problematizing that relationship. And since then, I feel like she's done a number of stories, often for the New Yorker at this point, but she'll dive in deep on you know, people getting in over their heads on the internet, you know, whether it's like a scan. I think there was somebody who pretended to have an illness and didn't have. I'm getting mixed up on the one she actually wrote, but like that's like her beat. Her beat is like this kind of like weird internet stuff and the way that it tends to pull people in. And so, yeah, I think the shorter version of my answer should have been internet trouble, not just teenage boys. So,
Yeah. Yeah, because the classic example of like getting catfished is like,
yeah,
like, right, but
yeah.
it can happen to anyone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um okay, another thing I have on the mood board is the HBO show The Righteous Gemstones, which, first of all, I mean, Danny McBride, another like, North Carolina icon,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
But as you get deeper into the book, because obviously we kind of joked about how the characters of Carly and Joy come from this like Christian girl Autumn kind of
Yes.
Just socialization, having gone to or like grown up in evangelical church culture, but the real animating like plot point that kind of like makes everything pick up is the introduction of this more sinister cult like church. And I just could not help but think about how the Righteous Gemstones kind of started as the show is supposed to be the send up of people who have become like self-made billionaires off of
Yes.
launching churches, but it's also weirdly this like action show, and
Yes.
there's like and just like there's lots of like guns and like I mean they're like ninjas and like car chases and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
anyway, I couldn't help but think of that when the cult community church is
It's
introduced.
perfect. I think it's a great show. Great show. I'm loving the mood board. A perfect reference. And you're right. There is this kind of line of like it's comic, but it's also terrifying. I mean, and I kind of think that generally around it is sort of tragic comedy. I mean, I think about like sort of Jim Baker and Tammy Faye Baker. I mean, it's flat. And then this is fiction. I don't want to get sued by anybody. It's all made up. But I mean, I have read about other cult like church organizations that have been implicated criminally, and there are some that exist. And so one doesn't have to like I will say like this is fiction and they're all made up, but you don't have to look too far in the real world outside of Righteous Gemstones and this to sort of like see it still happening, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, but that is the best. Uncle Baby Bobby Billy, what is his name? Uncle
Baby Billy.
Baby Billy? Uncle,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and you know how like Danny McBride's character like basically has this like group of guys who are also kind of like his goons and like his thugs, and like when he wants to like intimidate another church and like scare them off of like his territory or whatever, like he goes in with his guys, to like scare them off.
Yeah. 100. No, I totally. And again, like speaking non-specifically, I do think from what I have read in the past, people, I think, there was a place like in Tulsa, like a Bible college there. There were a couple of places that were pivotal, a ways back, let's say the 50s, 60s, I don't remember now. Um, but they very specifically were looking in places like Western North Carolina and probably other, I don't know where, other rural parts of the South where they could really, plant a church and establish dominance. I mean, they're not going to, for reasons that sort of make sense. I think different churches are going to go there, but like that style of church is probably not going to be appealing to go to a large urban center that's already full of churches. So I think they are kind of looking for their righteous gemstone turf. Yeah.
Yeah. But, so even though we do have this one organization that, like is bad, like they have, perverted like what the
Yeah.
church is supposed to be about, you do still have, show that, Karlie, really did grow up in this church community where she felt like she belonged,
Mm-hmm.
and, that is true for a lot of people. And so I think, again, to like showing that characters are complex and,
Mm-hmm.
like everyone's background and everyone's backstory, it matters to them and makes sense to them. It's not criticizing her for the way she's grown up or
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
kind of people she wants to be around or like the way that she wants to live her life, but
Yeah.
more like what happens when people take that too far.
You're exactly right. And what I would never want it to be read as, and I hope that this is apparent, is you know, a criticism of, faith traditions in and of themselves, or the desire for belief, or the desire for belief in something transcendent and something that connects all of us. Because I think that, in a way, so many people in the book are kind of cycling through false promises, or like you say, sort of perversions of some of these claims. But I still want there to be this sort of hope for something that is more truly connective, transcendent, beautiful, really. Like what is that thing that we can actually believe in, and how do we find that? So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Um, Another like big theme that I would love to talk about is like gender roles and just like,
Hmm.
just why like it I feel like it is really important to the story that, like we have these two female college roommates who, and the way that we kind of talked about like the Natalie Holloway of it all, how like young white woman's death can be kind of like deified in a certain way.
Hmm.
But then we also have this spectrum, like, there is a character who is transitioning in the
Hmm.
story. There's also some characters of guys who are like, I'm a good guy, like I'm a, cool guy. You've also got like the guy who's like a little emo, and then you've got the guy who's like kind of like the poster child for like toxic masculinity, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, I also thought it's interesting that in the church that is like the, the one that is like the evil one, the leader is a woman. Like
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
she's not like a major character, but just like the fact that you chose for her to be a woman, I also thought was
Yeah.
interesting. But
Yeah.
anyways, and then we've also got the aforementioned Professor Plum 71, who it has that, the classic archetype of the like cool, like male professor who's like a little bit older, but not way older, and is like befriends students a little too easily. And you're like, what is that
Hmm.
about? And then it is, well, it's about what you think it's about.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so what were you thinking as you were like creating this world and putting these women and men together?
I see. I kind of want to make you tell me as a reader, because I feel like you're so onto it. I'm like, yes, 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 that's what I was doing. Um, this is me being Professor Obvious when I say, uh, like, yes, I think it's about the complexity of being a woman, identifying as a woman, whatever that means in this world. I mean, I think I think it is a very interesting and complicated space to live in. And yes, then there's this sort of like range of roles and ranges of ways that that's complicated. So I sort of wanted to get to explore the gamut of that. I mean, it was very important to me in having the beginning where we sort of know Karlie and her kind of like sanctified, she's risen to the status of myth. I wanted to have her then come back and be a flesh and blood, flawed, 19-year-old person herself. That felt very important to me. Um, and yeah, I wanted, I think it is true. Like almost everybody is struggling with some implication or obligation that has to do with the roles of gender. I will also admit, for whatever this is worth, that I'm really fond of Professor Plum 71, which I think is almost the only way that with truth and with humanity one can write that type of character. I'm really fond of him. I'm not saying that I endorse his actions. I'm not saying that he's like a great guy, but I feel for him, like as I was writing, I feel for him. And I think that in a way he both represents toxic masculinity, but I think he himself was probably also a victim of that. I think he probably like grew up, yeah, shouldering that and comes by it truly. And yeah, he's one of my favorite characters. And I think one of the most interesting intense things, which is probably why it gets written about a lot, is this like there is a teetering line, I think, between really caring and good mentorship with an older teacher. I mean, they're always older, I guess. Mentorship with a teacher and a student, and then those lines blurring. I think it's just a very interesting, rich, productive space for fiction. And there are probably people out there who are like, that's been done. I'm tired of it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. But I think it kind of opens up some of those difficult spots around gender and gender roles and
Mhm.
our expectations. I think I just rambled to you, Emily. Did I
No,
answer?
no, no, no. Well, and I think, well, to kind of defend, like it being in the book, it is not, that's not the only relationship we're exploring in the book. There's so
Yes,
many
yes,
relationships that are,
yes.
there's
You're
this
right.
roommate relationship. There's
Yep,
Joy and her divorce. There's
yep,
Professor Plum 71 and his spouse and
yep.
how they navigate, their relationship which was very interesting. I do think I should probably disclose it at this point in the conversation. While I don't want to spoil anything, I should give a trigger warning that there is a sexual assault that takes
Yeah,
place in the book.
yeah.
I thought you wrote about it in such a sensitive way. And as you were
Mhm.
describing how your career started in this kind of like emergency, like inpatient
Mhm.
world, I am now looking back on having read that chapter and realizing like, um, probably that sensitivity is from unfortunately having to be present in those cases.
Mhm.
Um, but I do want to, mention that because, violence against women is a key
Yeah,
uh, part
yeah.
of this story.
You're right. You're right. Well, and I should have said this in the beginning, but in a way, violence against women, I mean, in a way, that was the starting kernel of the initial story, the seed story that was in Best American that you referred to, that then I sort of grew out into the novel. The very seed of that story was the true fact that one of my college housemates told me that anecdote. And she said, well, if you ever are being attacked, you just, eat grass until you vomit, fling yourself to the ground, like, make noises, bark like a dog, do whatever you can, make it so strange and so bizarre. I mean, who knows what type of fit you're having. And the person will scamper away. And I remember being struck by it, A, because I wondered if it would actually work. And B, because I thought, how strange that here we are at this place of idealism, that this public flagship university, brightest minds, and the smart kids from the far reaches of the states and beyond. And it is a place bound together in an enterprise that I think is fundamentally optimistic. Like it's sort of idealistic, optimistic, and yet the young women are trading this kind of anecdote because the reality is that we also live in a world of sexual assault and femicide, you know?
Yeah. And I just couldn't help but think of the Brock Turner and Chantal Miller case.
Mm-hmm,
You know,
mm-hmm,
speaking
mm-hmm.
of like things that are ripped from the headlines, and also how uh you know, he couldn't have really, you know, like he's not really guilty of, you know, the way that people are trying to explain away
Yeah.
uh what he did, and you understand why it makes it harder for victims to come forward in the
Yeah.
first place, because
Yeah.
there is, you know, kind of some indecision on the victim's
Yeah.
in the victim's mind about, like, can I even do anything about this? And if I can't, why am I going to put myself through some more trauma when
Yeah.
it might just lead to a dead end?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right.
The other thing that, as you were talking about the initial story and this whole like this advice, this quote unquote, you
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
to like act, like basically it's act like you're having a seizure, and it. But what's ironic is in the book there is a character who does have a real actual seizure,
Yeah.
and it is like like even reading it, you're put in the shoes of someone who's just in like in the room when it happens,
Yeah.
and that secondhand embarrassment for that
Yeah.
individual.
Yeah.
So there's actually a lot of layers of like disability that are also explored in the book that I thought was interesting, that I just wanted to highlight. So there's the, you know, aging parent who
Mm-hmm.
you know, has a terminal illness, and so that's part of the background with the seizure scene that I just mentioned, where, like, you know, the seizure is so severe. I mean, he literally like soils himself in a public
Mm-hmm.
place, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
so I just can't help but like compare that to this, you know, again, quote unquote advice.
Yeah.
Professor Plum 71 is it's not like explicitly stated, but I'm guessing it's maybe like an MS type of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
diagnosis.
Yeah. That's right.
And then, of course, we have this individual who has been found guilty and put in prison for, you know, because he is believed to have murdered Karlie, the, you know, center of the
Mm-hmm.
story. And he has severe deficits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're probably intellectual disability of some sort, although I don't think we have a clear sense of what his functional abilities are entirely, but definitely there's some limitation there, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, was all this like intentional, or how did you
Yeah. Yeah,
make those
no,
decisions to include that?
I mean, I think it was not. It's funny. No, it wasn't intentional. I mean, maybe this is just my acute awareness that we live in bodies. I mean, maybe that's just like you don't get through medical training without having that awareness where it's not. This sounds very bleak to say it's not if but when. But like there will be times when I'm so aware of that when I was in my medical training. It's like you were. It's not like some kind of clean thing where it's like, oh, you got your doctor card. You never have to worry about the burden of your own human body. Whew, thank goodness. I think it really is that like if everybody's well now, it's wonderful. But these are things that happen to you, loved ones, friends, and it's just it's part of living on the earth in a body. And so it seemed inevitable to me that if I have enough characters over a span of time, some of them would be dealing with the various things that we deal with living in bodies.
Yeah. I didn't, you know, yeah. Well, That is like my list of like my burning questions that like I had to ask. So, it's like one of those things like when you actually have the benefit of being able to sit the author down
Right,
and
right.
and hold you hostage to be like, why did you do this in the book? And of course, there's still like so many more things that I could, do in here. Like uh, of course, with all the Chapel Hill references,
Yeah,
we could
yeah.
have a field day with that. But is there anything that we haven't discussed yet about the book that you wanted to put out there as well?
No, I mean, I think your questions are brilliant. I think your mood board is brilliant. I think you should make the playlist. What a joy and a pleasure to have just like such a smart reader and a reader who like will approach the book on its terms and sort of see what it's trying to be. It's really a delight. So no, mainly I just have to say thank you, Emily.
Well, thank you for just being a friend of the bookstore for so long, and just championing us. Like as it feels very like mutual admiration society.
It totally is. I was going to say y'all are my number one favorite bookstore that I've not had the opportunity to set foot in, but I will. I'm going to
Yes.
someday, and I very much am a huge Friendly City Books fan. So go Friendly City Books. Woohoo!
Well, thank you. And thank you for everything, and just congratulations on all of
Thanks.
your accomplishments so far. We cannot wait for you to actually get to Mississippi for the Mississippi Book Festival, because Joanna and her cohort of South Arts writing fellows will all be at the Mississippi Book Festival. For those of you who are curious, the Mississippi's fellow is Melissa Ginsburg, a poet and novelist who we've had the pleasure of hosting in Columbus before. Louisiana is Maurice Carlos Ruffin, who read in Columbus last year at Mississippi University for Women at their annual literary symposium. I'm really excited to get to know the others who are part of this group. I mean, it's just like a incredible lineup of authors who are part of this. And it's the inaugural class of this particular
Yeah,
fellowship too. So, what a great honor, like so special.
it's
And
good company. I feel very lucky. It's great company. Yeah.
yeah. And Joanna's book comes out in June. It's on the Indie Next list, which for those of you in the biz know, like this also means it's bookstores across the country are excited about this book. I've had lots of other booksellers like, text me about it, email me about it, and just saying how excited they are about it. So come, in a few weeks' time, I feel like this is going to be all over everyone's Instagram feeds. So tag us if you're reading the book and let us know what you think, because we'll be excited to keep the conversation going. So, yeah, thank you again, Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thanks times a million.
Yeah. And to all of our podcast listeners, happy reading.